Hi, my name is Jordan Wright with OmniFeed and Supply, and I'd really appreciate it if you like and subscribe to this video. We're trying to hit 10 subscribers here as we get started up with our YouTube channel. So right now, in my store and out in public, when people talk to me, a lot of times they're talking about getting into chickens and getting into poultry and getting into broilers. So I thought I would share a little bit of my knowledge with you and get you started with broiler chickens. The reason that I really like broiler chickens is it's a really quick and fun project that's in and out in 7 weeks. We get a 0.15 pound broiler from the hatchery, and then in 7 weeks or even in 6 weeks, depending on how you're feeding it, you get a 7-pound broiler that you can take over to the processors and end up usually with about a 3.5 to 4 pound carcass that you can put in your freezer. And it's a lot of meat. It's really good meat. And in this video, we're going to talk about feeding our broiler chicks when they come from the hatchery. And you're going to really notice a trend here as I talk about feeding the broilers and watering the broilers. You're going to really notice something. So we'll talk about that as we get going. So one of the things is your chick feeders are going to look like this. These are plastic feeders. They come apart into 2 pieces, and they also sell and manufacture metal chick feeders. They are attached to these plastic jars that make it really easy to clean out the feeder and also clean out the jar. You simply fill the feeder up with feed, or it's the same jar that you would use for the water, and you screw it on, and then you flip it over, and you got a feeder. The water is going to look like this right here, and same thing, you'd put water in this jar, you'd screw it together, flip it over. Now, you will notice when you flip this over with water, that water starts coming out. It's just got to be a quick flip. There's really no secret on getting the water to not splash except for quick flipping it, because if you left it on, the water comes out right here. If you can see it, there's a little valve there. The water comes out of there, and if it flipped over, then it can come out. That's one thing that we're gonna need to be watching to make certain that the chickens aren't able to flip the water over, because if they were to flip the water over, then at that point, the water would go in the box. And that's also the reason why I like these quart jars. Worst thing is if this quart jar was to flip over, there'd be a quart of water in the brooder box. Really, yes, it's not very good for them, but it's not going to harm them until between the time that I checked on them and the time that I found that they had dumped the water over. It's just more going to be of an annoyance to you and not actually harmful for the chickens. Make certain if they were to dump their water over that they are getting cleaned up and you get fresh bedding in there, because if you don't have fresh bedding in there, then at that point you could start getting a bacterial growth. Like coccidiosis is really prevalent in moist, wet bedding, which it is probably the number one thing that you're gonna be fighting and having to deal with. So those are the chick feeders and the waters. They also have a metal one that they make, that the metal one can screw onto one of these quart jars, but then also onto a mason jar, which if you have a bunch of mason jars laying around, metal one might be pretty good for you. So we want to make certain that we're putting the water, we're filling the water, and we're putting it in our brooder box a day or 2 ahead of time for these broilers to come and for any chicks to come, because the water needs to be a regulated temperature. It needs to be as warm as their environment is and as warm as their body should be, because poultry, when they are born, don't have any feathers, and so they have a really hard time of regulating their body temperature, and we don't want to chill these chicks. We also need to make certain that you're dipping the beaks So when you get these chicks, you're literally going to dip their beaks into the water, and once they're dipped down in the water, you can pull them back out, and it's just a quick tap just to make sure that they know what is water, because these chicks were hatched from the hatchery that you bought them from, and if you picked them up from the hatchery, they're hatched from the hatchery, put in boxes for you to pick up. If they are going to be shipped through the mail, they are hatched, put in boxes, they put a grow gel in there or some type of food for them in case they were going through the mail for a few days, something that's going to be healthy for them and not hurt them, then they're shipped out. So these chickens most likely have actually never encountered water. And so we just need to make sure that they drink water, and you show them the water. You don't want to feed these chicks until after they are drinking, and after you actually visibly see majority of them drink. Once we dip their beaks into the water, they're gonna go to that water when we set them back down and drink, because most of the time they probably have not actually been around water. Yeah, they have eaten themselves out of the shell, so eaten everything inside the shell, and then that right there would sustain them for a few days. But the hatcheries a lot of times will plus put a grow gel or put something in there for a food pack. That way you won't have any problems, and they won't have any problems with any passing away throughout the mail. Usually if something was to happen or go wrong, hatcheries are really good about helping you out. So we can't let these chicks run out of water, and even as they are older, we can't let them run out of water. If you let them run out of water, if you're raising them for a fair, you're going to see that they stop growing, and then it takes a little bit of time to get them back to growing and your growth rate back as well. That if you're just raising from the table, that's going to happen as well. You're not going to get as big of a broiler as you could. And also, you're going to find out that if they don't have enough water, they're not going to be as tender, and they're not going to have as much water in that meat when we go to process them as what they would if they had plenty of water. From what we've figured out, testing things and watching other customers raise the broilers and process them and see what the meat looks like. So I talked about at the very beginning of the video that you're going to notice a trend. Yes, this video is about feeding broilers, but we've spent multiple minutes on talking about water. Well, that's because that is the most important nutrient to any animal, is the water. Water is the number one ingredient to any successful animal project, and water is the most important nutrient that your animal can have. Your animal could only live 3 days without water. It could live 7 days without food or longer. And so that is the number one key, is to keep your animal in water. For feed, we're gonna take our feeder, fill it full of feed. We're gonna put the bottom back on. We're gonna flip it over and set it down. We need to go and we need to continuously raise this feeder up as they grow, so that they are having to stretch to get into the feeder, because water is very important and food is very important as well. They're going to come into the food. Stretching them up is going to build up that upper body strength and build up that breast muscle, which is the number one cut of meat on this chicken that we're raising. One of the ways that we can do it, and you're going to eventually do it with the water as well as more and more pine sheavings get pushed into it, is with a concrete block. Use small concrete blocks and then build it up. Eventually, about 3 weeks, these broilers are going to be ready for an adult feeder of water. And you're going to notice that you're not keeping enough feed and water in front of them to stretch through from the time that you have to check on them to the time that they're ready to be checked on again. And that's when you need to be adding more feeders or waters, and also making sure that they can get into the feeder and the water, all of them. So if they're not, you need to be adding feeders and waters or buying bigger feeders and waters. Nice thing about the hanging feeders for the adults, we can hang them with a chain from the roof of our building, and that's the way that we can raise them up and up and up. Because as they get bigger and older, we need to be continuously raising that feeder up. And then also you're going to want that water raised up a little bit, because they're going to start trying to step on it and splash the water around. A lot of times, instead of hanging the water, because in another video I'll show you how a water works, we will go and we'll put concrete blocks underneath it. That way the sleeve doesn't have a chance of coming up and splashing and spilling that water. So we're going to feed them a 22% chick starter. We need to make certain, if we are feeding broilers only, or we are feeding chickens only, or chickens and turkeys, we're fine. Chickens and some other species of bird, we're fine with medicated or non-medicated. We need to make certain that if we are feeding chickens and waterfowl, like ducks and geese, absolutely no medicated feed. Medicated feed is not safe for ducks and not safe for waterfowl. They cannot handle it, and they just need to be on a non-medicated feed. So I hope in this video I helped inform you of the importance of water through a video about food. The importance of water, the water is the number one ingredient. If I went out to a customer's barn, the number one thing that I'm going to look at is, do they have enough water in their pen and in their coop? That's going to help them be successful. Number one ingredient for success is having enough water. Number two ingredient for success is having a clean environment, and the number three is feed. Because if that animal doesn't have a clean environment, doesn't have water, they're not going to eat, or they're going to get sick and they're not going to gain. So I hope that you learned something through my video, and I hope that you have a great day. Have a nice day. Bye.